It's our pleasure now to speak with Michael Eric Dyson, celebrated author. He's got a couple of best-selling books under his belt. He teaches at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and he's a broadcaster on NPR, ESPN, and elsewhere. Michael, great to have you here in Toronto.
Thanks for having me.
This is the big cultural debate of the moment. I'm sure you don't subscribe to the entire canon of so-called political correctness, but what elements of it do you think are indicative of progress in our society?
Well, look, I think people tend to forget that the left invented political correctness, not its idea, but the notion that we should be careful and cautious and not be so sensitive and hypersensitive and to exaggerate or excuse certain things that we're doing. So the left is the one who came up with the concept, but it got hijacked by the right. And now it seems to mean everything that I'm mad at that I can't be bigoted about anymore is politically correct. I can't call you names. I can't talk to women the same way. I can't look at Jews or, Muslims and so on. So everything is so hush-hush and it's so politically correct. Well, you want to be correct about a lot of stuff. If your check at the end of the month comes home mathematically incorrect, you're going to be upset. So we want correctness in a lot of stuff. Now, there's no exact metric when it comes to politics, but I would say that I'm from a people who have often argued against the mainstream, who have been outside of the parameters of protection of the mainstream, and that political correctness to us sounds like people wanting to hold on to the same kind of useless bigotries that used to inform what we did as a nation. So the helpful part is to be self-critical, to take inventory, to examine one's own life, and to figure out ways in which we have indeed lost a sense of challenge. I teach in the university, so I'm critical of some of the moments where people are so sensitive that we can't deal with tough stuff. Well, we're going to look at this police violence because it's actually real. I'll give you a trigger warning. Here it is. It's coming. Let's grapple with it. So I don't dismiss young people's needs for safe space and trigger warnings, but I think that the classroom is a robust center of learning. And sometimes we have to confront ideas we don't like. And I believe in more speech, not less. I believe that people must counter speech with other speech. Now, that doesn't mean that some speech is not connected to hateful practices and by itself conjures those heinous and hateful practices. But for the most part, I think those are advances we can say, well, that's some good stuff, and we can build around it.
I think one argument you're going to hear tonight, probably from your opponents, is a rebuttal of this idea of privilege. Privilege on the part of people who look like your opponents, who are white, who are generally further up the class ladder rather than further down, and who are men.
Right.
And who resent this idea that somehow their voice needs to be understood through the context of their lived historical experience versus, let's say, your community's lived historical experience. How do you respond to people's kind of attention and anxiety and anger about that?
Wow, really surprising, huh? That people who have benefited from privilege are now mad that it gets called out. Geez, really? You know what amazes me? White men in particular who call college students snowflakes. Oh, you can't. Who's a bigger snowflake than white men? I'm just trying to figure it out. Like, where? Where? No, mommy, they won't let us have our toys in the sandbox, and we have to share now. But they're mine. Are you kidding? Like, you're white, male, able-bodied, heterosexual. Yeah. I'm a black man. Am I benefiting from my male status? Of course. Because I'm living in a predominantly male society, or at least a patriarchal one, not numerically, but in terms of outlook and ideology and philosophy. So when I hear white men snowflaking and bitching and kvetching and complaining about privilege, I mean, I'm going to talk about it tonight, but I'll tell the poet, here I'll just say who the poet influenced, an 18th, 19th century poet influenced Kaiser Soze, who said that the greatest thing the devil did is to make people believe he didn't exist. That's white male privilege. The greatest thing they can do is to, what do we have? I mean, we run most banks, we run most countries, we run most universities, we have extraordinary benefit. And people misunderstand. To have white male privilege doesn't mean every white male is privileged. That's not what it means. It means you got to step up, a leg up. in my country, when we had apartheid, better known as Jim Crow, it didn't mean because there was a white water fountain, black water fountain, and that white folk had most of the resources, that every white person had the resources. No, it meant that if you were white, you had a better chance, and automatically you were considered. In fact, it's tougher on you. You mean you white and you still failed? What's up with you? You started out with an advantage. Well, economic inequality is real. The downturn in the economy that affects everybody is real. So we have empathy for white people who struggle against the odds. But at the same time, if only your people could get into the game. Babe Ruth didn't hit 700 and some home runs against the best ball players. He hit them against the best white ball players. Right. And we see now these Latino boys and these African-American boys are just as good as these white boys and giving them a run for their money. When there's a level playing field and the rules are clear, as Jesse Jackson says, white folk come up against something, oh, we've had it best and greatest all along. We controlled the competition. We didn't even let black people into school, into Harvard and Yale and Princeton, right? So white man, what speakest thou? How do you conjure this? Now, would there be resentment? Of course, but is that resentment an index of legitimate and valid complaint? No, you're bitching. Anybody who's had an advantage who has to give it up is gonna be mad. You know, as the great rappers say, tell them why you're mad, son. So, no disrespect to my confreres, but the reality is that the jig is up. You've had access to Western history for about 300-400 years. You used the Enlightenment to justify your irrational assault upon people's lives. You had enslavement, you had Jim, what you complaining about, right? Now we have to share, well, you know, the guy in Toronto killed people because he couldn't get a date. Get us some game. Learn how to talk to a woman. Do what the rest of us have to do. Let me figure this out. Go to the dance, she turned me down. That's how most of us get married. The girl, we turn us down 50, all right, come on, all right, come on, all right. That's the nature of the game. But as a white man, you feel you have some extra oomph. Yeah. You have some extra reason and rationale to actually have access to Raquel Welch. No, bruh. Most people don't. Right? So the thing is that I think that argument is rather thin and vacuous.
Yeah. One argument you're going to hear tonight is this idea that by putting issues of race and gender at the center of the political conversation, in a sense, asserting that people's identities emerge through their gender and their race, you are kind of sowing a tribalism in our society where it's next to impossible for us to come together around common goals to pursue common purposes.
Well, we just want to be like white people. I'm sorry, we want to be like y'all. Who started this? I don't think Native Americans started it. I don't think indigenous people here started that. I don't think they gave their name Saskatchewan. I don't think they did that. I'm not sure, but when I check history, I think white people invented race. My God, now it's out of control. Now you don't have the major investment in it. Now you've lost the narrative. So now you're upset? Black people did not invent race. People of color did not invent race. Women didn't invent gender. These are man-made lakes that suck and drown our humanity. So the fact is, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm putting race at the center of the conversation because you keep killing me in the streets as a police person, or at Starbucks, you keep calling the police, or if I'm having a barbecue, who's putting race at the middle? I'm just trying to have a barbecue. I'm a 12-year-old kid in Cleveland, and I'm trying to play with a gun, and you roll up in 2 seconds, you kill me. Who's putting race at the conversation at the middle, right? The practices and behaviors. Now, what our friends on the right would want us to do is to pretend they don't exist, to live in what Gore Vidal called the United States of amnesia, or in this case, the United Kingdom of amnesia, or in this case, the United Canadian amnesia. So the thing is that we can't pretend these things don't exist. So if we just wish them away, let's not talk about race and class and gender, because you're disuniting us. Oh, because when you had access to it, when white was dominant, in fact, white was a default position. It didn't have to come out the closet. It didn't have to announce itself as white. When you're dominant, you don't have to announce it. Everything is. When you're doing it, it just is what it is. So the great philosopher Beyonce Giselle Knowles said when she was handing out an award to Colin Kaepernick, it's been said that racism is so American that when you challenge racism, it looks like you're challenging America. Oh, so that there's been an identification of America with certain practices, groups, tribal identities. Who's more tribal than a culture that has made a cult out of its own mythic individualism, its massive manhood and masculinity. And when that manhood has been proved to be toxic or deficient or incapable of generating sufficient ideas that will sustain us as a nation, that patriarchy is a spent idea, then the blame game begins, and then the very people who invented the game get mad that the game is out of hand. But you invented the game. This is you invented Monopoly, now you're mad. You don't have any money on the game. These are the rules. You generated them. So the thing is, hopefully, however, when we talk about race or class or gender or sexual orientation or otherness, we're trying to foreground the humanity of other people. And so I think it's extremely important to acknowledge that race is what white people invented, right? When you go back and look in the history, this is the justification of it. David Hume, Immanuel Kant, some of the greatest philosophical minds deployed their philosophical acuity in defense of their tribal identities. Thomas Jefferson, writing in the Notes in Virginia during the day, questioning the rational capacity of the Negro, but at night, linking with Sally Hemings, so that his loins trumped his logic. Thank God. So the reality is that when we look at the history of the development and evolution of the ideal of whiteness and of Canadian or American or European identity, white folk got a lot of skin in the game, literally, invented this thing. And now that it's beyond their control and they don't exactly benefit from it, or they exaggerate their victimhood. Again, going back to white men who complain about people being snowflakes, I've never seen such a culture of complaint, a culture of whining. They could have their own vineyards. It's just stunning. Just wine, Burgundy and blush and, Zinfandel. It's just, just emotional whining that is astonishing. And I think we just got to call it for what it is.
Hey, well, you've called it for what it is. Michael, thanks for coming to Toronto.
Thanks for having
really
me, man.
appreciate having you here tonight.
Appreciate
and
it,
I'm
brother.
going to enjoy so much moderating you on stage this evening.
I'm looking forward to it.